All right, the last region we're going to look at involving mandates and partitions is going to be Japan. And we've already talked about this one a little bit. So this will be a little bit of a refresher. This part is not terribly long. It's going to be pretty short. Okay, so Japan. Japan was under U.S. occupation following World War II, and this occupation was led by MacArthur. Japanese authorities wanted to simply amend the 1888 Meiji Constitution once they started to help them rebuild and restructure their government. But MacArthur proposed three principles for redrawing a new constitution in Japan. The emperor, so these three things, these three principles were that the emperor was accountable to the Japanese people. Japan had no authority to wage war, and the establishment of a parliamentary system, ridding Japan of inherited power of the aristocracy, which had plagued them for a very long time. General Whitney was tasked, he was kind of voluntold, that he would be the one responsible for creating Japan's new constitution. But he was told he had to do this in less than a week. So you can imagine the amount of strain and stress that this put on this poor individual's shoulders. So he was voluntold that he had to do this, and he was told he had to do it in less than a week. Japan held their first general election on April 1st, 1946, and during this time they allowed women to vote. It was kind of like an automatic universal suffrage thing. Yoshida of the Liberal Party won and formed a coalition with the Japanese Progressive Party. On June 20th, 1946, the Yoshida cabinet was tasked with revising the proposed constitution led by Hitoshi. And finally, it was approved October 2nd, 1946, with only 5 votes against it. So Whitney is going to produce this thing. They're going to have their first election. And then after that, the newly created Yoshida cabinet is going to look over this constitution, and they're going to discuss everything, veto things if they don't like it, amend things if they wanted to. And then eventually that is what they are going to vote upon. And it was approved October 2nd. This is a picture of MacArthur with the Japanese Emperor Hirohito following the end of World War II. So this was the man, of course, who was in charge of Japan, but he was not the one calling the shots during World War II. The other picture that you see are children with care packages from America. Just again, we talked about how Horton Hears a Hue was kind of like it wasn't kind of like, it was a version of what occurred following the dropping of the bombs. So, and as you know, we sent over billions of dollars worth of supplies to help this country rebuild. The way of the criminals, the Japanese war crime trials. You guys have already kind of looked at, we've discussed this, but in all, over 1,100 Japanese military leaders were tried and sentenced during U.S. occupation. And the result was that throughout our entire occupation, we will completely reshape their economy and their government. Okay, the last one that we're going to look at is French Indochina. Um, for this one is tricky because in every instance so far we have seen a mandate made, a partition established. This is the one area where the Allied power that had been in charge, they just simply refuse to give it up. And this is going to be France with French Indochina. Okay, so background of what we're going to eventually see become the Vietnam War. So Vietnam had been a French colony under the name of French Indochina, as we've discussed. It included Vietnam and then also Cambodia and Laos. French colonists had taken peasant land, then they forced them on plantations to grow rice and to extract rubber for French profit. So this is way before World War I even began. The French started experiencing some resistance, and so they put even more restrictions onto the Vietnamese people. And it only irritated them more, so opposition continued to grow. It was just this snowball effect. You push, we're going to push back. You push, we're going to push back. During World War I, while the French were more focused on the Western Front, so this is during the actual war, the Vietnamese elite land-owning citizens took advantage of the absence of the French, and they began establishing their own businesses. These elite were pro-French initially, but they began to become disgruntled because they had no political say. Where have we talked about this before? Citizens who were not elite but had been gaining an education began to question the inequality and their own desired freedom. Again, sounds very, very similar to another group that we've talked about so far with the bourgeoisie. Interestingly enough, we're looking at the exact same country in charge. Following World War I, when other countries were forced to give up their colonies, the Allies refused. Revolutionaries who tried to seek independence fled to China in 1924, led by their leader, Ho Chi Minh, seen here. All right, so we have this elite class. They're creating their own businesses. When World War I ends, the French say they're going to return, and French Indochina is going to be reclaimed in the name of the French. And so once they get there, this revolutionary who's trying his hardest to kind of jumpstart this new political system in French Indochina is forced to flee to Japan. Now, who is currently in Japan starting to create a whole new political system for himself? I'll give you a second to think. You probably know who it is. So in 1930, Ho Chi Minh is going to create the Indochina Communist Party. And even though he was in exile in China, he was still able to continuously expand the party. Um, Even though, again, he was for a little bit of time, he was in China in exile, and then another bit of time, he was in Soviet Union. So you've got the two communist powerhouse societies, and he's living in there and he's learning this new socialist ideology. It's no shocker what we're going to see happen next. Right? It's just like how many times can some of the Allied power just shoot themselves in the foot? Japan causes a disruption to everything. Okay, because we've got two sides. We've got the nationalists, and then we've got the attempted communists. So you've got in China, just and in French Indochina, the Japanese are just going to run amok. So regardless of what your political ideology was, you now had a common enemy, and for both East Asia and Southeast Asia, that was Japan. So in the 1940s, the Japanese took control of Vietnam after already entering into China. The following year, Ho Chi Minh returns, even though he's been in exile, and he organizes a group of fighters to fight against the Japanese called the Viet Minh. Later on, because of his efforts, he will be viewed as a hero. This was an organization whose later goal was to win Vietnam's independence from foreign rule, meaning from French rule. The Allies eventually will defeat Japan, as we know, which allowed the Viet Minh to capitalize on this goal, just like in World War I. France had reduced attention in Indochina, and so Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh see an opportunity to kind of uh, prosper in the absence of the French. So on September 2nd, Ho Chi Minh sends a notice of declaration of independence to France, announcing that Vietnam is now an independent state. And here are some pictures of the fighters fighting against the Japanese in French Indochina. France had no intention, though, of relinquishing its former colonies, singing song and dance after World War I. So French troops were back in Vietnam by 1945, and they regained the southern half. Ho Chi Minh vowed that he would fight from the north in order to liberate his people in the south. Ho Chi Minh, this is one of the most brilliant quotes historically, because of the analogy here with animals that are native to this region. So he actually made this statement against the French once they returned. If ever the tiger pauses, the elephant will impale him on his mighty tusks. But the tiger will not pause, and the elephant will die of exhaustion and loss of blood. So when drawing that comparison, if you look at the fact that he is representing the Viet Minh are represented by the tiger, that will outlive the dying elephant despite the injury, the elephant being France. That was the analogy that he was drawing. What happened next in history is going to spark the Vietnam War. So when we get to that topic in the Cold War, we're going to go back to this and talk about a little bit more in depth what was going on in China um, at the time, and then that trickle out effect with Ho Chi Minh in the French Indochina region in Southeast Asia. Thank you for listening. That is it for the mandate system and UN responses to colonial assets following World War II.